Do you really know as much about Robinson Crusoe as in the novel? The real Robinson was a pirate, a drunkard, and a rapist. He wasn't shipwrecked on the island. He was put there as punishment. He fled to sea for adventure, then experienced the real thing for more than 4 years on a deserted island. Daniel Defoe was apparently inspired by the life of Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk when writing his famous novel, Robinson Crusoe. He had to slightly modify many of the facts to suit the sensitive eye of the reader. But what was the truth? Alexander Selkirk as the prototype of Robinson Crusoe. Alexander was born in 1676 as the 7th son in a shoemaker's family. A hot-blooded robber, he was involved in every argument and fight, and there was no mention of a well-mannered young man. After a stormy family dispute, he ran away to sea at the age of 19. He soon found himself on a ship sailing to the coast of South America. The crew consisted of so-called legal pirates who captured Spanish ships in the name of the crown. Within a few years, Alexander had developed into a skilled navigator. He then worked on a ship called the Cinque Ports, equipped with 16 cannons and a tyrannical captain. Selkirk was anything but easygoing, and his problems with authority had been with him since childhood. They most likely led him to the deserted island that would become his home for the next few years. There are several versions of how Alexander ended up on the island. According to one of them, Selkirk was afraid of sinking the ship, which had been damaged by several naval battles. He therefore requested to be put on the nearest island. Another version depicts that the ship anchored at the uninhabited island of Masa Tierra, which has been called Robinson Crusoe Island since 1966, to replenish supplies and ensure the necessary repairs. However, the reconstruction of the vessel did not take place, and after a month's break, Captain Thomas Stradling ordered the sailors to reboard and set sail. Selkirk protested loudly, hoping that the crew would side with him and refuse to obey. As a result, however, he ended up on the island alone, equipped with a gun, an axe, a Bible, and a bottle of rum. If for the first few days he thought that the captain just wanted to scare and punish him so that he would return for him soon, in the end, he stayed on the island for a total of 4 years and 4 months. However, the version that he was abandoned on the island after a heated argument with the captain, who thus got rid of the arrogant navigator, giving him only a few clothes, a musket, a supply of tobacco, and a Bible, is also quite plausible. Alone on the island. After his return to civilization, Selkirk liked to tell that during his first days on the island he read the Bible and hoped for an early rescue. But he soon realized that if he was to survive, he had to somehow prepare for the new conditions. It was obvious that the island, inhabited exclusively by rats, goats, and cats, would be his new home for an unknown amount of time. One doesn't have to be very clever to guess that the pragmatic decision of the 28-year-old Alexander was probably also driven by the fact that he had run out of rum. The first months were, however, very psychologically demanding for him. A sailor accustomed to life on a ship where solitude was not a problem was suddenly in a completely different situation. He later admitted that he had even considered suicide. Over time, however, he got used to the solitary lifestyle, tamed a few wild cats, and learned to provide himself with food. Allegedly, what he missed most was plain bread. Ship on the horizon. The first apparent chance of rescue came only after several years. When one day 2 ships sailed into the island's bay, Alexander was overjoyed. He ran to the beach, waving his arms and shouting to attract attention. He then realized that they were Spanish ships. The crew evidently recognized his English and opened fire. The castaway had no choice but to hide and save his life. Any hope of returning home was gone. Luck smiled on the abandoned sailor only on February 1st, 1709, when 2 British ships anchored near the coast. Alexander drew attention to himself by lighting a fire on the beach, and soon a boat was heading for the island. To his great surprise, the ship's crew found a savage on the island dressed in goatskin. A day later, on February 2nd, Alexander Selkirk left the island after 4 years and 4 months. On the ship, he learned that his forced isolation had actually saved his life. The Cinque Ports ship eventually sank off the coast of Peru. Only the captain and 7 crew members survived. However, they were captured, and a Peruvian prison was certainly not a welcome refuge. Back to the sea and then home. Alexander did not give up on a career as a sailor. Or in short, he did not know anything else. He did not even last a year, and became the captain of the ship that rescued him from the island. 3 years later, he returned to his native Scotland. His family had long considered him dead, and suddenly he appeared before them alive and well, moreover in very expensive clothes. He used his stay on the mainland to show off his story. It is said that for several months he just went from town to town and told his experiences in pubs for beer and food. His unusual fate eventually caught the attention of Daniel Defoe, and in 1719, the first edition of the book, The Life and Strange Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, Sailor of York, saw the light of day. Reference in literature and what happened next. However, there were also authors who took Selkirk's story as such. In 1829, John Howell's book, The Life and Adventures of Alexander Selkirk, was published, which portrays the main character relatively realistically. However, the greatest literary success was achieved by Daniel Defoe's adaptation. 4 editions were published in the first year, followed by translations of the work into French, Dutch, and German. The book has been published in more than 100 different languages to date. When the 7th son of a shoemaker from the small Scottish village of Lower Largo set off to sea 330 years ago in search of adventure, no one would have imagined that his life story would inspire one of the most famous works of world literature. Selkirk himself died on December 13, 1721, on board ship, of course. He returned to the life of a sailor in the autumn of 1720. But after a few months at sea, he contracted yellow fever or typhus and was buried at sea shortly afterwards, according to sailors' tradition.